She stepped into the night, carrying nothing but dignity, unaware that a single encounter would tear open a world built on power, secrets, and dangerous longing. On the other side of that car door waited a man hidden behind a perfect facade. A man whose carefully constructed life was beginning to crack. One quiet conversation, one trembling heartbeat. And suddenly, two souls from opposite worlds found themselves bound by a truth neither was ready to face. Something was awakening, fragile and breathtaking, even as shadows threatened to swallow it whole. If you love stories filled with emotion and unexpected turns, subscribe to the channel and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support helps this story world continue to grow. The night settled over Nashville with the weight of humid air, carrying the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. Neon lights flickered along the avenues, trembling on the slick pavement like restless fireflies. Inside a modest sedan parked beneath a street lamp, Connor Kensington adjusted the brim of a plain black cap and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. No tailored suit, no private driver waiting outside, no entourage or polished armor of power. Tonight, he was no one. A ghost moving through a city that only knew him as the immaculate billionaire with a spotless smile. He took a breath, meant to steady him, though nothing inside him felt steady. His advisors' voices still echoed in his mind, each one pushing him toward a carefully curated fiancé, a scripted love story that would protect his image. But Connor had spent too many years wrapped in a lie to marry another one. He needed truth, raw and unfiltered. He needed to see how people treated a man without wealth or influence. And so, beneath the shimmering veil of a Tennessee night, he opened the rideshare app and waited. His first request appeared within moments. A woman named Sadie. Pickup location: a quiet residential block near the edge of downtown. Destination: an unfamiliar building in a dimly lit industrial district. Connor accepted the ride with a tap, unaware that this choice would unravel everything he believed he controlled. He drove through the winding streets until he reached a small apartment building with peeling paint and a porch light struggling to stay alive. She stepped outside as if she was stepping out of another world entirely. Sadie Hart carried a garment bag over one shoulder and a small crossbody purse pressed against her side. Her deep chestnut hair framed her face in loose waves, and even in the low streetlight, her warm brown eyes carried a glow of determination wrapped around exhaustion. When she opened the car door and settled into the back seat, Connor felt the air shift. "Good evening," he said, keeping his voice calm, softened by a tone no boardroom had ever heard from him. "Evening," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. She fastened her seatbelt, then rested her hands atop the garment bag as though guarding something precious. He began to drive. The city hummed around them, a pulse of music and muffled conversations drifting from open bar doors. For a few minutes Sadie stayed silent, watching the blur of lights through the window. She carried the silence like a woman who had learned long ago that speaking openly often brought regret. "Big night?" Connor asked gently, careful not to push. Sadie exhaled a soft laugh, though it carried more sadness than humor. "I guess you could say that." Her fingers traced the zipper of the garment bag. "I have a meeting, an important one." He glanced at her in the mirror. "Nervous?" "I cannot afford to be," she answered, eyes fixed forward. "When opportunities come rarely, you take them, even if they come wrapped in uncertainty." Her gaze lowered for a moment. "Even if you wished they came wrapped in dignity instead." Connor felt something inside him turn, an ache he had silenced for years. He wanted to ask her more, but she continued before he could speak. "What about you?" she asked, lifting her eyes toward the mirror. "Long night of driving?" "Trying something different," he replied simply. "Trying to see life from another angle." Her lips curved in a faint smile. That sounds nice. Terrifying, but nice. Her phone buzzed with a message. She read it and her posture tightened. The softness in her features hardened into anxiety that she tried to hide. Another message arrived, then another. Her breath grew uneven. "Everything all right?" Connor asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. She forced a smile that fooled no one. People who offer help sometimes forget how to be respectful. That is all. He stayed quiet, letting the weight of her words linger. Sadie returned her attention to the window, but her fingers trembled against the garment bag. When they approached the address, Connor slowed the car. The building looked wrong immediately. No lights, no signage, no indication that music or business or dreams lived inside. Just a warehouse-style structure with shadows clinging to every corner. Connor's instincts sharpened. "Are you sure this is the place?" he asked. Sadie stared at the building, doubt flickering through her eyes, then nodded. "This is where he told me to come." Connor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "If something feels off, I can wait here." Her silence spoke louder than reassurance. She opened the door, steadied herself, and stepped out into the heavy night air. But as she approached the entrance, a man emerged from the shadows. His voice slithered through the air with the kind of tone that made Connor's blood run cold. Sadie stiffened. The man reached for her wrist, pulling her closer. "Let go of me," Sadie warned, her voice steady but tight. Connor was out of the car before he registered the movement. One stride, then another, his feet carrying him toward her with a force rooted in instinct rather than reason. He reached them just as Sadie wrenched free, using her elbow and her whole body to push the man back. "You heard her," Connor said, stepping between them. His voice was low, controlled, but held a promise the other man clearly recognized. The man scoffed and backed away, muttering curses before disappearing into the darkness. Sadie pressed a hand to her chest, her breaths trembling. She was not weak, not fragile. She was a woman who had been forced to be brave too many times, and Connor saw the exhaustion behind her fire. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her voice cracked slightly when she said "thank you." Connor glanced at the ground and spotted something glinting near the curb. He bent down and picked it up. Her USB drive. Its plastic casing was scratched but intact. He held it out to her. "This must matter," he said gently. Sadie cupped it in both hands, as though he had returned a piece of her soul. "I recorded this on borrowed equipment," she whispered. "It is everything I have left that still feels like mine." Connor felt the air shift again, heavier now with something intimate and unspoken. "Let me take you home," he said. "Please." Her eyes softened. "All right." Back in the car, she sat quietly, her palm resting over the USB as though it needed her warmth. He drove slowly, letting the minutes stretch between them. When he stopped in front of her building, the porch light flickered again, casting her in a halo of fragile gold. She met his eyes in the mirror, and for the first time since she had entered his car, she allowed him to see something unguarded. "Thank you for treating me like I mattered," she said, her voice tender and aching. Connor swallowed hard. No one had spoken to him like that in years. He nodded, unable to form words without revealing too much. Sadie stepped out, her garment bag brushing her leg as she climbed the stairs. She turned once, offering him a small, tired smile that hit him with unexpected force. Then she disappeared behind the building door, leaving Connor parked in silence. The night resumed its usual hum, but inside the car something had cracked open, not a weakness, not a regret, a beginning. He had come searching for truth in people. He had found it in her. Morning sunlight washed over Nashville in soft gold, warming the rooftops and gliding over the glossy windows of Kensington Tower, the headquarters where Connor Kensington spent most of his days in silent battle. Inside, the polished floors reflected a world of authority, wealth, and expectations. Assistants floated from office to office, their steps hushed, their expressions sharp with purpose. Even the air inside the building felt curated, tempered, crafted to maintain perfection. But when Connor stepped through the glass doors, perfection felt like a suffocating mask. He carried the weight of the previous night in the quiet tension of his shoulders. The memory of Sadie Hart's trembling breath, her thank you whispered beneath the flickering porch light, had carved itself into him like a cord that refused to fade. He moved through the lobby with his usual calm posture, though anyone looking closely would have noticed the subtle changes. A slight heaviness in his steps, a lingering softness in his gaze. His security chief, Jax Monroe, followed at a respectful distance, observing everything with eyes that missed nothing. Behind them, the mirrored elevator doors opened with a gentle chime. Inside the elevator, Connor leaned back against the cool metal wall and closed his eyes for a brief moment. The fragile, intimate moment with Sadie had not left him. He had told himself he wanted truth in people, but he had not anticipated how truth could destabilize him. When the elevator reached the executive floor, the doors opened to reveal Elias Crown waiting for him. Elias, with his steel-grey eyes and calculating calm, held a tablet against his chest like a shield. "Morning," Elias said, not bothering with a smile. "We need to discuss the engagement plan. Time is not a luxury." Connor removed his cap and handed it to Jax before answering. "Not now." Elias sighed, walking beside him. "Connor, the press is already circling. A strategic engagement would overshadow everything. We can control the narrative if we move quickly." Connor stopped walking and faced Elias directly. "A narrative is not a life, and I am not choosing a wife the way I choose a marketing campaign." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Then how will you choose?" Connor hesitated, the memory of Sadie's earnest eyes rising again. "I want someone real." Elias blinked slowly. "Real is unpredictable, and unpredictability is a risk you cannot afford." "Real," Connor repeated firm, "and I will decide, not you." Elias studied him for a moment, then nodded with resigned acceptance. "Very well, then at least allow me to coordinate the invitation you sent last night." Connor's heartbeat tightened. "She agreed?" "She has not responded yet," Elias replied. "But the meeting is prepared. If she comes, the conference room is ready. If she does not—" He paused long enough to make the silence feel sharp. "We continue the plan with someone else." Connor brushed past him. "She will come." He did not say it as a hope. He said it as something he somehow already knew. Hours later, the morning drifted into early afternoon. Connor found himself standing by the tall windows of a private conference room, staring at the city below. Nashville's sunlit skyline stretched out like a promise that felt too distant to reach. He adjusted the cuffs of his crisp white shirt, letting out a slow breath. He told himself that he was doing this out of necessity, out of strategy, out of duty to protect everything he built. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted to see her again. The door opened softly. Meredith Lane, his legal counsel, stepped inside with a folder in her hands. "Everything is prepared," she said with her usual poised tone. "If she chooses to accept, her rights will be protected. The agreement is strict and fair." "Strict," Connor murmured. "Fair is debatable." Meredith's expression softened just slightly, enough to remove the edge from her professional mask. "Connor, choosing someone genuine is admirable, but genuine people do not always want to be part of someone else's strategy." Connor nodded, his gaze fixed on the door. "I know." A soft knock echoed through the room. Connor felt his chest tighten as he turned. The door opened. Sadie walked in. She entered with quiet determination, holding her garment bag neatly folded over her arm. Her hair framed her face in gentle waves, but her expression was far from gentle. She looked composed, her shoulders squared, but her eyes carried something deeper, hurt wrapped in dignity. Meredith greeted her politely and stepped aside. Jax remained near the door, vigilant yet respectful. Connor moved closer, every step a battle between hope and remorse. "Sadie," he said softly, her name unfolding from his lips like a confession. She looked at him with a calm so controlled it became a statement of its own. "You are not a driver," she said, her voice steady, though a tremor of emotion lived beneath it. "You are Connor Kensington," he swallowed. "Yes. And last night," she continued, "was not coincidence." "No," he admitted. "It was not." Sadie inhaled slowly, grounding herself before speaking again. "You let me talk to you. You let me trust you. And all the while, you were... what? Testing me?" He stepped closer, but not too close. He did not want to steal her space. "No," he said, shaking his head quietly. "I was searching, not for a test, not for a game. I needed to see someone real." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "And you chose me." "I did not choose you," he said, his voice low, earnest. "You appeared, and everything changed." Sadie's breath faltered for only a moment before she steadied it again. "Do not say things that sound beautiful when they come from a place of deceit." The words pierced him more deeply than he expected. "Then let me start with the truth," he said. "I invited you because I need help, and because you deserve to understand why I hid who I was last night." Her eyes flickered with conflict. "I deserve many things, Mr. Kensington. Honesty is the least of them." He nodded, accepting her words like penance. "Sit with me, please." Sadie hesitated, her chest rising with a slow breath. Finally, she took a seat at the conference table, keeping the garment bag folded on her lap like a shield. Connor sat across from her, but not directly opposite, close enough to speak gently, far enough not to intimidate her. Meredith remained nearby, but silent, giving them privacy without leaving the room. "I am facing something difficult," Connor began. His tone remained calm, but carried an undercurrent of vulnerability. "Someone is trying to destroy everything I have built, and the plan my advisors want is to protect myself by creating a story the world will love. A romance." Sadie stared at him with disbelief. "A romance," she repeated quietly. "With me. Not as a toy. Not as a puppet," he said. "As a partner. Someone with her own conditions, her own power, her own voice. You would not be owned. You would not be controlled." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. "A partnership built on lies is still a lie." He shook his head. "The only lie between us is the one I told last night, and I am ending it now." Her gaze softened just enough to reveal a sliver of curiosity. "What exactly are you proposing?" Meredith stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. "Miss Hart, this is a contract that protects you. Completely. It ensures autonomy, compensation, legal security, and the right to end the arrangement if any boundary is violated." Sadie did not touch the folder. She looked only at Connor. "And you think," she asked quietly, "that I would agree to pretend to be the partner of a billionaire I met by chance in a rideshare?" Connor's eyes darkened, filled with an emotion he did not attempt to hide. "I think you are the only person I have met in many years who speaks without fear, who fights without losing her soul, and who made me believe that honesty might still exist somewhere." Sadie looked away for a moment, as though steadying herself. The conference room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the humming air conditioning and the sound of her quiet breathing. "Say something honest," she whispered, without thinking about strategy or image or consequences. Connor leaned forward, his voice low and raw. "I have not stopped thinking about you since you walked away from that car." Her breath caught. He continued, each word chosen with care, not because you were in danger, not because you were brave, but because when you thanked me, it made me feel human. Sadie's eyes shimmered with something tender, fragile, and dangerous. She stood slowly, the garment bag slipping from her lap and resting against the chair. "Honesty is a start," she murmured, "but trust takes more." He rose with her. For a moment, they stood face to face, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath mingle with his own. "Let me earn it," he whispered. Her hand touched the back of the chair, trembling just slightly. "Do not make promises you cannot keep." Their eyes held each other with an intensity that filled the room like a pulse. "Sadie," he said softly, "I do not want to hurt you." She exhaled, a sound filled with resignation and longing. Sometimes we do not hurt each other by intention. Sometimes it happens because our worlds collide where they should never have met. He stepped closer, slow enough to let her walk away if she chose. "Then let them collide," he whispered. She let out a soft, trembling breath, her gaze drifting for one fragile moment to his lips before returning to his eyes. "This is not a fairy tale," she murmured. "No," he said, "but it could be something better." Sadie took the folder in her hands, not opening it yet, just holding it as though it carried both danger and possibility. "I will think about it," she said. Connor nodded, though it took every ounce of control to remain composed. "Take all the time you need." She walked toward the door, each step slow, deliberate. At the threshold she paused and turned back toward him. "You were kind last night," she said softly. "But today, be honest with yourself too. Wanting something does not make it right." Their eyes met once more, and Connor felt a quiet ache bloom inside his chest. Sadie stepped out of the room, leaving behind the faint scent of rain, jasmine, and the unspoken truth that their lives had already begun to intertwine. The morning after their meeting arrived, wrapped in a thin veil of pale sunlight, the kind that touched Nashville softly, as if trying to avoid waking the city too abruptly. Sadie Hart sat at her small kitchen table, the contract folder resting untouched in front of her. Her coffee had gone cold long ago, forgotten as she stared at the bold lettering of her own name printed across the top of the agreement. She had opened it once, read the first few lines, and felt her breath catch somewhere between disbelief and indignation. A contract engagement, a legal partnership with a man whose world operated on power and sharp perfection. A world that had brushed against hers for a few fragile minutes in a car and left her forever changed. Sadie touched the edge of the folder with her fingers, feeling the cool texture beneath her skin. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to breathe, slow and deliberate. She told herself that she should refuse, that she should walk away, that she should hold on to her quiet life, her dignity, her independence. But another truth whispered louder. Connor Kensington had looked at her as though she were not just another civilian orbiting his universe. He had looked at her as though she were something important, as though she were real in a way he had forgotten existed. Still, her pride battled fiercely. Pride carried her through long nights, countless rejections, and the bitter taste of fear every time she sent out a demo, hoping someone would take her seriously. Pride had been her anchor. The idea of stepping into his world not by merit, but by arrangement, felt like a betrayal to everything she had fought for. She took another breath, another moment, another fragile attempt at making sense of what she now held in her hands. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from Meredith Lane. "Good morning, Miss Hart. Whenever you are ready, Mr. Kensington will arrange transportation to bring you in for final negotiations or amendments. There is absolutely no rush." No rush. The words carried the weight of a world that did not understand what it meant to rush for survival, to rush against time, to rush against bills and fear and shattered dreams. Their pace was different from hers. Their world moved on schedules, polished with luxury. Hers moved on instinct. Sadie closed the folder and stood. She needed air, and clarity, and courage. She reached for her garment bag, not out of necessity, but because holding it reminded her of the girl who still believed in possibility. Then she stepped outside. Morning warmth brushed her face as she walked toward the street. She had not asked for transportation, yet a sleek black car waited quietly by the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door with a respectful nod. "Miss Hart, Mr. Kensington asked me to escort you whenever you were ready." She hesitated. She had not said she was coming, but she also had not said she was not. When she arrived at Kensington Tower, the foyer seemed even more imposing than before. Tall glass walls rose upward like modern pillars, catching the sunlight and refracting it into 1,000 small rainbows across the polished marble floors. Assistants moved with a kind of elegant urgency, their heels clicking like a well-timed soundtrack to a life built on precision. Sadie's presence, with her simple dress and well-worn purse, felt almost too soft for the sharpness of the place, but she lifted her head, refusing to shrink. Meredith greeted her with a warm, professional smile as she stepped out of the elevator. "Miss Hart, I'm glad you came. Please follow me." They walked through a corridor lined with framed platinum records belonging to artists Connor had helped elevate. Sadie could not help but pause in front of each one, feeling both admiration and something more complicated. These artists had been chosen. She had never been one of the chosen. They entered a smaller conference room, intimate and minimalist, with soft lighting and a large window overlooking the city. Connor stood near the glass, hands resting in his pockets. He wore no suit jacket today, only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled slightly up, revealing strong forearms and a vulnerability he did not try to hide. When he turned, their eyes met with a force that felt almost physical. "Sadie," he said softly. Her breath hitched. She hated how much that simple greeting affected her. She straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Kensington." His lips lifted slightly at the formality. "I hoped you would come." She forced herself to stay steady. "I came because I have questions, and because I refuse to be swept into anything blindly." Connor stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he were approaching something delicate, something he wanted to hold but feared he might break. "You deserve clarity," he said. "Whatever you want to ask it. I will answer honestly." She studied him for a moment. He looked tired, more human than the polished figure she had seen in headlines. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, the kind earned from sleepless nights spent wrestling with truths. Sadie took a breath. "Why me?" Connor's expression softened. "Because you are the first person in a very long time who spoke to me without expectation, without fear. You did not try to impress me. You did not try to use me. You simply existed with an honesty I have not felt in years." Her voice trembled before she steadied it. "And you think that makes me a good candidate for this arrangement?" "I think it makes you someone I can trust," he said. Sadie's gaze dropped for a moment before rising again. "Trust goes both ways." Connor nodded, his eyes deepening. "Then let me earn yours." She looked down at the folder in her hands. "This contract, it protects me, yes, but it also binds me to a life that does not belong to me. A life of cameras and expectations and pretending to be someone I am not." "You would never have to pretend," he said, his voice low. "Not with me." She searched his face, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. "I do not want to become a mask in your world." "You will not," he insisted softly. "If anything, I think you will force me to take mine off." The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. Sadie felt heat travel up her throat, not from embarrassment, but from the quiet way his words caressed something inside her she had tried to hide. She sat down at the table, opening the folder again. "I have changes. Tell me," he said as he sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. She pointed to the clauses one by one. "I want full autonomy. I want creative control over how I am portrayed publicly. I want the right to withdraw if I feel unsafe, unheard, or disrespected. And I want the engagement to support more than your reputation. If I am to be part of your world, then your world must also protect women who cannot defend themselves." Connor listened intently, each requirement shaping something in his expression, admiration, respect, and a blooming tenderness he did not attempt to conceal. "You will have all of that," he said. "Every word, every boundary, every right." His voice was a touch deeper now, as though emotion were tugging at its edges. "And one more thing," Sadie added, lifting her eyes to meet his directly. "I want transparency from you. I do not want secrets. If I am to stand by your side, I cannot do so in darkness." For a moment he did not answer. A shadow flickered through his gaze, subtle but unmistakable. Sadie saw it, and the air tightened around them. "Transparency," he murmured. "Yes, I owe you that." There was a hesitation, but only for a heartbeat, and though Sadie could not decipher its meaning fully, she let it pass. For now. Connor signed the amended documents with decisive strokes. Then he placed the pen down and gently slid the folder toward her, his fingertips brushing hers in the process. The touch was nothing more than skin against skin, yet the sensation rippled through her like a whisper that reached deeper than words. Sadie closed the folder and held it to her chest. "Then it is agreed." He exhaled, a breath of relief mixed with something warmer. "Thank you." She stood, and he rose with her. For a moment, they simply looked at one another, suspended in a quiet that pulsed with meaning. Sadie felt the tension coil between them like a fragile thread balancing on the edge of something beautiful and dangerous. "I should go," she said softly. "Let me walk you out." "No." She lifted her hand slightly. "If you walk me out, people will see, and I would rather keep this moment ours." He nodded, understanding blooming in his eyes. "Then at least let me say something before you leave." She waited. Connor stepped closer, slow and careful, until the space between them held the unmistakable thrum of a connection neither had intended to form. "Sadie," he said quietly, "I want to protect you, but not by caging you. I want you to feel free with me." Her breath trembled. "Freedom is difficult to trust." "Then let me teach you," he whispered. Her heart ached with the softness of his tone. She reached for the doorknob, pausing as her gaze lingered on him. "Connor," she murmured, "if this becomes something more complicated than we intended, promise me you will not run from it." He stepped forward, stopping mere inches from her. His eyes held hers with such intensity she felt it inside her bones. "I will not run," he said. Her lips parted with a fragile sigh. Then she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, her heart beating in a rhythm she had never known before. Behind her, Connor remained still, savoring the lingering warmth of her presence, knowing only one truth. The contract was meant to build a shield, but somehow it had opened a door instead. Nashville awoke drenched in sunlight, brushing every rooftop with a shimmer that felt deceptively gentle. Beneath that golden glow, however, a storm brewed quietly inside Kensington Tower. Assistants rushed through corridors with clipboards in hand, stylists whispered over mood boards, and PR specialists rehearsed statements as if preparing for a royal unveiling. Everything and everyone moved with the frantic precision of a world that believed image was the only truth that mattered. and at the heart of it stood Sadie Hart. She had arrived early, wearing a simple cream blouse tucked into high-waisted black pants and ankle boots that had seen more sidewalk than red carpet. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her makeup was minimal, allowing the warm brown of her eyes to speak more loudly than any cosmetic enhancement ever could. She stood before a wall of mirrors inside a private preparation room, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of strength and uncertainty. She was about to step into a role she had never imagined, a role the world would analyze, criticize, and dissect without mercy, and yet beneath the nerves, something else pulsed quietly within her, a sense of purpose. Not because of the cameras waiting for her, but because of the man whose life now brushed against hers in ways neither of them could deny. She heard the door open behind her. She did not need to turn to know who it was. "Sadie," Connor said softly. His voice rolled through the room like warm velvet, seeping into her spine and settling in her pulse. She lifted her gaze in the mirror, watching as he approached. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that made him look every bit the mogul the world worshipped, but the slight looseness of his tie, the faint shadows under his hazel eyes, and the way he exhaled when he saw her revealed something far more human. "You look—" He paused, losing himself for a heartbeat. "Beautiful." A warmth touched her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "Thank you." He stood beside her now, both facing the mirror. Their reflections seemed to belong to two worlds that should never have met, yet the way their eyes lingered told a different story, one where the worlds had collided and neither could pretend otherwise. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," she admitted honestly, "but I will do it." Connor's eyes softened. "You do not have to be anything other than yourself." She let out a quiet breath, the truth of that statement settling into her bones. "Your world does not always like people who are themselves." "I do," he murmured. The room thickened with unspoken tension, delicate and intimate. Their hands brushed lightly as he reached to adjust a loose strand of her hair, his fingers grazing her cheek for the briefest moment. The touch was feather-light, but the electricity it sent through her was unmistakable. "Connor," she whispered, her heart tightening. His eyes held hers, searching, feeling, wanting. "Yes?" she swallowed softly. "Do not let them turn me into someone I am not." His voice lowered to a vow. "Never." The knock on the door broke the moment. Elias Crown entered with a tablet and a sense of urgency that seemed to vibrate through the air. "We are 2 minutes behind schedule," he announced. "If we want the story to hit the evening cycle, we need to move." Connor's jaw tightened ever so slightly. "We are going." Sadie followed him out of the room, down corridors filled with staff who pretended not to stare, though their whispers lingered in the air like a faint breeze. Their first appearance as an engaged couple would take place at a charity venue hosting a music foundation event. A subtle, relatable outing, according to Elias. Nothing over the top, nothing extravagant, just polished enough to transform headlines and quiet the rising speculation. When they stepped out of the sleek black car at the event, the world erupted. Camera flashes burst like tiny fireworks. Shouts rose from the press. The crowd surged forward, eager to capture every detail of the woman standing beside the powerful Dubai Maharaja. Sadie felt the pressure instantly. The heat of the lights, the eager eyes, the glimmer of curiosity mixed with doubt. But then Connor's hand found hers. He did not grip too tightly. He simply linked their fingers together, steady and warm, as though grounding both of them. "You are safe," he whispered from the corner of his mouth. She turned her face slightly toward him, giving him the smallest smile. "Only because you are here." That smile, gentle, genuine, made something in his chest pull painfully, beautifully. They walked the red carpet, stopping to greet foundation staff and volunteers. Sadie listened with attentive warmth to the stories of young musicians, her sincerity drawing the admiration of those around her. Connor watched her, unable to hide the pride in his eyes. She spoke to people not as if she were important, but as if they were. It was a trait he had forgotten existed in this world of performance. A photographer called out, "Mr. Kensington, look this way. Miss Hart, closer to him, please." Sadie hesitated, unsure. Connor stepped slightly behind her and lowered his head near her ear. "May I?" he asked softly. She nodded, her breath catching. His arm slipped around her waist, gentle but protective, his hand resting lightly at the curve where her waist met her hip. The warmth of his touch stole a breath from her lungs, and when she leaned subtly into him, the world seemed to slow. The cameras flashed, but in that instant it felt like there were only two people standing on that carpet. After the photographs, they moved inside the venue. The music was soft, mingling with the murmur of conversations and clinking glasses. The lighting was warm, illuminating the faces of donors and artists. Connor guided her toward a group of industry executives. Their expressions sharpened the moment they saw Sadie. She felt their judgment sweep over her like a rehearsed performance, polished smiles hiding sharp assessments. "So this is Ms. Hart," one man said with a too-smooth smile, "the newest addition to the Kensington orbit." Another woman added, "We have heard so much about you. It must be overwhelming stepping into this life so suddenly." Sadie felt the subtle sting beneath their polished tone, but before she could respond, Connor spoke. "Sadie is not stepping into anything," he said firmly. "She stands beside me by her own choice." His voice held a quiet authority that silenced the group. Sadie looked up at him, her heart swelling at the unexpected defense. They guided her to a private table for a brief live-stream interview. A camera was set before them, and soft lights illuminated their faces. The host smiled brightly. "Ms. Hart, your engagement to Mr. Kensington has fascinated the public. People want to know what you feel stepping into such a visible role." Sadie breathed in slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I feel humbled," she said, voice steady. "But more than that, I feel grateful, not for the attention, but for the trust between us. Trust is rare, and when it exists, we must honor it." Connor's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Trust," he said in the same interview, "is the foundation of everything we are building together." The host beamed. Viewers would surely swoon, but beneath the romance, there was a fragile truth. Their partnership was still new, still delicate, still covered in unseen edges, yet the warmth in Connor's eyes whenever he looked at her made the world around them blur. As the live stream ended, Connor placed his hand gently over hers on the table. He spoke quietly, his voice meant only for her. "You were perfect." Sadie shook her head lightly. "I was truthful. That is all." He smiled, his thumb brushing the side of her hand in a gentle caress. "Truth looks beautiful on you." Her breath faltered. She forced herself to speak, though her voice came softer. "Connor, you cannot say things like that unless you mean them." He leaned closer, the space between them drawing tight with tension. "Sadie," he whispered, "I have never meant anything more." For a moment, she forgot they were in a crowded venue. She forgot the cameras, the pressure, the expectations. All she saw was him, the man behind the empire, the man who looked at her as if she were the center of his quiet world. They left the table, but as they walked toward the exit, a sudden commotion erupted. A reporter pushed past security, lunging forward with a microphone in hand. "Ms. Hart!" he shouted. "How does it feel being chosen by a billionaire after years of obscurity? Are you using his wealth to elevate yourself?" Sadie froze. Connor's posture stiffened instantly. Her voice came out soft but unwavering. "I do not measure myself by wealth, and I certainly do not use people." The reporter smirked. "That is not what some sources are saying." Before Connor could intervene, the reporter reached for Sadie's garment bag, tugging it as though to expose something. The strap slipped from her shoulder, her breath catching in surprise. Connor reacted without hesitation. His hand caught the bag before it fell, and with his other arm he pulled Sadie against him, shielding her as security rushed forward. "Enough," Connor said, his voice like thunder contained by steel. "You do not touch her." The reporter was dragged away, shouting questions that dissolved into the noise of the crowd. Connor's arms remained around Sadie, holding her protectively, his breath warm against her hair. She stood in the circle of his embrace, trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming tenderness in the way he held her. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. "No," she breathed. "Not any more." He eased back only slightly, his hands resting lightly on her arms, his eyes scanning her face with raw concern. "You do not deserve this," he murmured. She looked up at him, her voice trembling with emotion. "I knew what I agreed to, Connor, but I did not know it would feel like this." He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Tell me how it feels." Her eyes met his with vulnerable honesty. "Like I am balancing on the edge of a world that does not want me in it." His expression softened into something deep and aching. "Then let me hold you steady." And for one suspended moment, beneath the soft glow of distant lights and the murmur of a restless crowd, Sadie felt completely steady in his arms. Completely seen. Completely chosen. The rain arrived without warning. Nashville's sky, which had been a dull grey for hours, finally surrendered and opened in a quiet, steady fall that washed the streets in silver. Drops tapped softly against the wide windows of the secure residence Connor had arranged for Sadie, a place meant to protect her from the chaos outside. Inside, the world felt hushed, intimate, and almost painfully still. Sadie stood near the living room window, watching the rain trace thin rivers against the glass. She wore a simple oversized sweater and leggings, her hair loose and curling gently at the ends from the humidity. She held a warm mug between her palms, though she barely sipped from it. Her thoughts churned too heavily for comfort. Every hour since the charity event had felt like walking through a thick fog. The photographs, the questions, the whispers behind her back, the hands reaching too close. She could still feel the tug of the reporter's grip on her garment bag, the startled beat of her heart when Connor had pulled her into his arms to protect her. It all lingered, refusing to fade. But what unsettled her most was the way her heart had leapt when she felt Connor's breath brush her cheek as he told her she was safe. She wanted to deny it, to bury it, to pretend it was only adrenaline. But the truth crept through her defenses like warm light through shadows. She cared for him, deeper than she should. A soft knock echoed from the hallway. Sadie turned, her breath tightening with anticipation she tried to hide. "Come in." Connor stepped inside, holding a tray with simple dishes, roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, and a bowl of steaming rice. It was not extravagant. It was not plated like something from a luxury hotel. It looked human, warm, humble, exactly like the man who carried it. "I thought you might not have eaten," he said quietly. Sadie blinked, touched. "You cooked?" He set the tray on the coffee table with a faint smile. "Do not look so shocked. I am not completely useless in a kitchen." "You are wearing a $1,500 shirt," she said softly, surprised to hear her voice tremble. "People who wear shirts like that do not cook." He laughed under his breath, though the sound was tinged with something tender. "For you, I can learn." Her breath caught. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, but inside her chest, a storm stirred. Sadie moved toward the couch, lowering herself onto the soft cushions. Connor took the seat beside her, leaving just enough space to be polite, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He handed her a plate, then one for himself, though she noticed he barely touched his food. His eyes lingered on her instead, studying her with a quiet devotion he never spoke aloud. "Tell me," he murmured, "how you are feeling." She hesitated, her fingers curling around the plate's edge. Confused, tired, a little shaken. "And?" he pressed gently. She swallowed. "And I do not know how to stand in your world." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "My world is not something you walk into. It is something I should meet you halfway in." His words brushed against something vulnerable inside her. She set her plate aside, the food untouched. "Connor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you cannot keep saying things that sound like promises." He turned toward her fully now, his expression open, honest, wounded by truth. "I am not trying to seduce you, Sadie. I just want to understand you, and I want you to understand me." She studied him carefully, her eyes softening. "Then tell me the truth. All of it." Connor inhaled deeply, as if gathering the pieces of himself he kept scattered behind locked doors. "There was a time," he began, his voice low, "when I believed success could fix everything, that money, recognition, influence, all of that could heal what was broken. When I was younger, I signed something I did not fully understand. I was told it would protect the company, protect everyone involved. I did not question it." Sadie's breath stilled. "It was an agreement," he continued. "A settlement, a silencing. Someone was hurt, Sadie, someone who deserved justice, not paperwork. And I signed because I thought it was the right thing, because I was naive, because I was afraid." Sadie felt her heart ache, not at his mistake, but at the remorse etched into every word. "You were manipulated," she said gently. "I was complicit," he countered, his voice rough with guilt. "It is something I have carried for years, something I can never undo. And now, someone is using it against me, using it against you." Sadie felt the tremor in her hands, not from fear, but from the intimacy of his confession. She reached out, almost without thinking, and placed her hand on his fingers curled around hers immediately, as though he had been waiting for that touch forever. "Connor," she whispered, "everyone carries something they wish they could rewrite. What matters is who you choose to be now." His eyes lifted to hers, dark with emotion. "And who am I now?" She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling with sincerity. "Someone trying to change, someone trying to be better, someone worth believing in." A wave of tension washed over him, dissolving into something fragile and warm. He brought their joined hands to his chest, holding her touch against the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Sadie," he murmured, "I want to protect you from all of this, but I do not want to cage you. If you stay, I want you to stay because you choose to." Everything inside her tightened, softened, melted. "I do choose," she whispered. "But I need to know you will not lie to me, not even to protect me." "I will not," he vowed. Their faces were mere inches apart now, drawn together by an invisible pull neither could resist. Sadie felt the world shrink until only his breath, his gaze, his presence existed. Connor placed a gentle hand on the side of her face, his thumb brushing along her cheekbone as though memorizing her. "You have no idea," he whispered, "how deeply you move me." Her breath trembled, warmth flooding through her. "Then show me what that means." Their foreheads touched first, soft and tentative, the kind of touch that asked a question before seeking an answer. Sadie closed her eyes, inhaling the quiet scent of him, clean, warm, edged with rain. "Sadie," he murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion, "if I kiss you, it will not be pretending." Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it against her ribcage. "I do not want pretending," she breathed. "I want real." His lips hovered over hers, barely brushing, a whisper of contact that sent a shiver through her entire body. Sadie lifted her hand to his jaw, her thumb grazing the stubble there. His eyes fluttered closed at the softness of her touch, and then, gently, hesitantly, as if both were terrified of breaking something sacred, their lips met. The kiss was slow, tender, and filled with a longing neither of them had dared voice until now. There was no rush, no urgency, only the deep, aching pull of two souls leaning into each other because they had finally found a quiet place to land. Connor's hand slipped behind her neck, his fingers threading into her hair as he drew her closer. Sadie's hand slid to his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, their breaths mingled in the warm space between them. "This is not part of the arrangement," Connor whispered. Sadie cupped his face gently. "I know." His eyes softened, the tension in his expression dissolving into something pure and vulnerable. "I want more than a contract, Sadie." She felt her throat tighten, her heart swelling with something she could no longer deny. "And I want more than protection, Connor." They sat there for a moment, unable to move, unwilling to break the connection that pulsed between them like a fragile light. Outside, the rain poured harder, drumming steadily against the windows. Inside, the storm within them grew quieter, deeper, steadier. Connor's hand remained on her cheek, his touch gentle and reverent. "Stay tonight," he whispered. "Not because you must, but because you want to." Sadie rested her hand over his. "I am already here." The truth in those 4 words wrapped around them like a warm, glowing ribbon, binding them in a way no contract ever could. And in the soft glow of the room, surrounded by rain and the echo of their kiss, they simply remained close, their hearts beating in unison, discovering what it meant to choose each other without fear. The storm that had lingered over Nashville all afternoon broke just as evening settled in, washing the city in a cold, relentless rain. The droplets fell like silver needles, tracing shimmering paths down street lamps and storefront windows, turning the sidewalks into mirrors of trembling light. Inside the secure residence, every sound of thunder echoed faintly, pressing against the fragile quiet Sadie and Connor had carved for themselves in the past day. Sadie stood in front of the vanity, fastening the small gold earrings that matched the soft champagne dress Connor's stylist had sent earlier. The gown flowed delicately around her, simple yet elegant, its fabric catching the lamplight like a whisper of warmth. She smoothed her hands over the skirt, though her thoughts were far from calm. Tonight, they would attend a small industry gathering to maintain appearances, a gathering that felt more daunting than any stage she had ever imagined standing on. As she breathed in deeply, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked almost like a stranger, softly made up, her hair styled in gentle waves, her eyes shimmering with a mix of nerves and determination. She barely recognized herself, and yet deep inside, she knew she had grown into this moment, whether she had chosen the path or not. Behind her, the door opened with a faint, familiar sound. "Sadie," Connor murmured. She turned slowly, her breath catching the moment she saw him. He wore a black suit that fit him like a second skin, his tie knotted neatly, his hair styled with that effortless precision he never pretended to care about. But it was not the suit that captured her breath. It was the way he looked at her, as if she were made of starlight and secrets, as if every part of him leaned toward her without him even realizing it. "You are breathtaking," he said softly. Her heartbeat fluttered. "You always say that as if you have never seen me before." "Every time feels like the first," he replied, his voice steeped in a sincerity that made her knees weaken. He approached her slowly, his steps quiet on the polished floor. When he reached her, he lifted a hand and let his fingers graze her cheek with a tenderness that sent warmth spiraling through her. She leaned into his touch instinctively, her breath mingling with his. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," she whispered honestly, "but I am ready to stand beside you." He closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the trust in her words. When he opened them, a softness she rarely saw illuminated his gaze. "Then we go together," he murmured. Minutes later, hand in hand, they stepped into the waiting car, rain tapping against the roof like a nervous heartbeat. The city lights blurred behind the fogged windows as they drove toward the venue. Inside the car, the silence wrapped around them like a cocoon. Not uncomfortable, but electric. Sadie could feel the weight of Connor's stare on her, and when she turned, she found his eyes tracing her face as though memorizing every curve, every flicker of emotion. "What is it?" she asked softly. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "Sometimes I forget this is meant to be an arrangement." Her breath trembled. "Connor." He leaned closer, his voice a quiet confession. "When I am with you, nothing feels staged." Her lips parted to respond, but the car slowed, jolting them back to reality. The venue loomed ahead, its entrance glowing under soft lanterns despite the rain. But the moment the car stopped, the calm dissolved. Cameras flashed wildly from behind umbrellas. Voices rose like waves crashing against a fragile shore. Reporters pressed against barriers, their eyes sharp, their questions sharpened into verbal weapons. Sadie inhaled tightly. Connor sensed her tension instantly. He covered her hand with his, squeezing gently. "I am right here," he whispered. "I will not let anything happen to you." She nodded, drawing strength from the warmth of his touch. When they stepped out of the car, the world attacked. "Sadie, are the rumors true? Is your engagement a publicity stunt? Sources claim you tricked Mr. Kensington. Care to comment?" The barrage hit her like cold rain against bare skin. She tried to keep walking, lifting her chin with quiet dignity, but the headlights, the flashes, the shouts, it all blurred into something disorienting. Connor placed a firm hand on her back, guiding her through the chaos. "Ignore them," he murmured softly. "Keep your eyes only on me." She did, and for a fleeting moment, the noise dimmed. Inside the venue, the warmth of the chandeliers and the murmur of polite conversation contrasted sharply with the storm outside. Yet the tension did not fade. People turned as they entered. Some smiled warmly, others whispered behind manicured hands, a few stared with thinly veiled hostility. Sadie felt it all. Connor escorted her to a quiet corner, away from the crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked. She breathed slowly. "I will be." He reached for her hand again, his thumb brushing gently against her knuckles. "If it becomes too much, tell me." She smiled faintly. "You will be the first to know." Before he could respond, Elias approached with a strained smile, holding his ever-present tablet. "We have a situation." Connor's jaw tightened. "What situation?" Elias lowered his voice. "A leak. Someone has released fabricated messages showing Sadie plotting to trap you during the rideshare incident." Sadie froze. "What?" Connor stepped closer to Elias, anger radiating through him. "Show me." Elias turned the screen. There were screenshots, doctored beyond doubt, of conversations Sadie had never written, messages that painted her as manipulative and calculating, messages that would spread like wildfire. Sadie felt her breath leave her. "No," she whispered. "I never wrote any of that. Connor, I swear." He placed his hands on her cheeks, so abruptly, so desperately, that she gasped. "Sadie!" he said firmly, his voice trembling with conviction. I know you. This is not you. I trust you." Emotion swelled in her chest, warm and fragile. "You believe me?" "With all that I am," he said. But belief did not stop the damage. Within moments, guests began checking their phones. Conversations shifted, glances sharpened toward Sadie, filled with judgment and assumption. A woman approached, her tone coated in false sympathy. "It must be so hard navigating sudden fame, dear. People do desperate things in this industry." Sadie's spine stiffened. "I did nothing desperate." The woman smiled thinly. "Of course." Connor stepped protectively beside Sadie, his presence towering, his voice cold. "If you have something to say it to me. Otherwise, walk away." The woman paled and retreated. Sadie felt her strength wavering, her chest tightening with the weight of so many eyes. She turned to Connor. "Can we go somewhere quiet?" "Yes," he said instantly. He guided her to a side hallway where the noise faded and the lighting dimmed to a soft glow. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate feeling like I am drowning in a place that does not want me." Connor lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were filled with an emotion so fierce it almost frightened her. "You belong wherever you choose to stand," he said, "and tonight you stand beside me." Her eyes shimmered, vulnerability slipping through her defenses. "Connor, this is too much." He stepped closer, cupping her face with both hands. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling. "Sadie," he murmured, "you are stronger than all of them. You walk through their judgments with grace they cannot understand. You breathe truth in a world addicted to lies. Do not let them dim you." Her hands rose to rest on his wrists, her voice trembling. "I feel safe only when I am with you." His lips brushed against her hairline in a barely there kiss. "Then stay with me. Right here. Right now." Her heart raced as she looked into his eyes, eyes that held a promise deeper than any contract. "Connor," she whispered, "what are we becoming?" He did not pull away. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low and raw. "Something I do not want to lose." A soft breath escaped her, warm and trembling, as her fingers lifted to trace the line of his jaw. His eyes fluttered closed for a moment, absorbing the tenderness of her touch. The air between them pulsed with quiet intensity, with the kind of longing that grew in the spaces between words, rather than the words themselves. Connor nodded, taking her hand as though it were the most natural act in the world. They left the venue together, stepping back into the rain-soaked night. The city felt colder now, harsher, filled with shadows that whispered lies. But as Sadie and Connor settled into the back seat of the car, their hands remained intertwined, anchored in warmth. The world outside blurred behind streaks of rain. Inside, in the quiet safety of shared breath, Sadie felt her heart settle, not with fear, but with something deeper, something real, something that, despite everything, refused to break. The sky over Nashville shifted from soft grey to a brooding charcoal as evening settled in, as if the heavens themselves sensed what the night would demand. The first raindrops began to fall in slow, deliberate strokes, tracing paths down the windows of the secure residence like tears searching for release. Inside, the lights were warm, gentle, and deceptively peaceful, but the air carried a tension so delicate it could unravel with a breath. Sadie stood at the center of the living room, smoothing her palms over the elegant midnight blue dress Connor's team had sent hours earlier. The fabric shimmered under the soft illumination, its subtle sheen catching the light with each small movement she made. It hugged her waist delicately, falling gracefully to her knees. Her hair had been styled in loose waves that brushed her shoulders, framing her face with a softness she did not entirely feel. Tonight's event, a private industry gathering hosted by one of Nashville's cultural foundations, was not supposed to be overwhelming. Elias had described it as intimate, strategic, controlled, but Sadie had already learned that nothing in Connor Kensington's orbit was ever truly small. His presence alone transformed ordinary into spectacle, quiet rooms into whispered fascination. And now she would stand beside him again, under lights she had never asked for. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She was not a woman who cowered before fear, but tonight her heart felt as fragile as the thin chain around her neck. A gentle knock sounded. "Sadie?" Connor's voice seeped through the door, deep and warm and filled with a tenderness he did not show the world. She turned. "Come in." The door opened, and Connor stepped inside with a calm that belied the storm beyond the windows. He wore a suit of deep onyx, his white shirt crisp, the knot of his tie perfectly aligned. But it was the quiet intensity of his gaze that struck her most. His hazel eyes, so often guarded before strangers, softened when they found her. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. "Sadie," he whispered, his voice dropping into something reverent. "You look extraordinary." Her breath trembled with a mixture of nerves and an emotion she wished she could control. "Thank you." He approached slowly, each step purposeful, as if approaching something precious. When he stood before her, he lifted his hand to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, warm and gentle, and the contact sent a ripple of heat through her. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. "As ready as I can be," she answered truthfully. He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "Stay close to me tonight. If anything feels too heavy, tell me. I will not let you walk through it alone." Her eyes lifted to his, drawn helplessly by the gravity of his sincerity. "I trust you." Those 3 words tightened something deep in his chest. He held her gaze for a quiet, breathless moment. Then he extended his hand. "Shall we?" Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had been crafted to fit together. The rain fell harder as they left the residence, tapping rhythmic patterns on the roof of the sleek car, awaiting them. Inside, the world shrank to a cocoon of dim lights and unspoken tension. The city outside blurred into streaks of gold and grey as the car moved through the wet streets. Sadie watched the reflections dance across the window, her thoughts spiraling. She felt Connor's gaze lingering on her, warm and steady. When she turned her head, their eyes collided. "You are quiet," he murmured. "Just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated. "About whether I will ever feel like I truly belong in this life." Connor leaned toward her, his voice rich with conviction. "You do not need to fit into it. I will make space for you, however you need it to be." Sadie felt the words sink into her like heat, spreading through chilled skin. She looked down at their hands and let her thumb gently graze the back of his. "Thank you." When they arrived at the venue, umbrellas opened, cameras flashed even in the rain, and voices swelled like waves crashing against the shore. Connor stepped out first, holding his hand towards Sadie, helping her from the car. The moment she appeared, murmurs rippled across the line of reporters. She braced herself. Connor's arm slid around her waist, his touch protective, steadying her. "Eyes on me," he whispered. She nodded, her breath brushing his jaw as she whispered back, "I can do that." Inside, the event glowed with warm golden lighting, decorated with floral arrangements and soft music floating through the air. Yet beneath the beauty lingered something sharper. People watched them closely, curiosity shining in their eyes. Connor kept her near, introducing her to producers, artists, and donors. Some greeted her warmly, others assessed her with thin smiles that never reached their eyes. One executive, polished in a navy suit, offered his hand. "Ms. Hart, welcome. We hope this world will treat you kindly." She smiled politely. "Thank you, I hope so too." His smile sharpened. "Kindness is earned." Connor's posture shifted, protective tension rolling off him. "Kindness," he corrected softly, "should never have to be earned." The man excused himself quickly. Sadie exhaled, her heart beating a touch faster. "They do not hide their feelings, do they?" "No," Connor said, looking at her with soft remorse, "but I will shield you from every one of them." His words wrapped around her like a warm cloak. And yet the storm found its way in. Near the center of the room, a cluster of guests suddenly pulled out their phones. Surprise flickered across their faces, then shock, then whispers. Sadie felt their eyes on her, heavy, invasive, hungry for scandal. Elias approached swiftly, tension etched into his features. "Connor, we need to speak." Connor guided Sadie toward a quiet corner before turning to Elias. "Tell me." A batch of messages was leaked online, fabricated. They show Sadie supposedly strategizing to trap you, manipulate the rideshare situation, and secure her future. Elias swallowed. "It is already spreading." Sadie's vision blurred for a moment. "No." Connor immediately turned to her, his hands finding her arms, steadying her. "Look at me," he murmured. Her eyes lifted, filled with anguish. "Connor, I never wrote anything like that. You know I did not." He cupped her face, his palms warm against her cheeks. "Sadie, I do not need proof. I know your heart." Emotion surged in her chest, raw and overwhelming. "Do you really?" His thumb brushed her cheekbone with the gentleness of a caress. "More than I know anything else." Tears threatened to gather, but she refused to let them fall. The room swayed with whispers, with quick glances that pretended to be subtle but cut like paper edges. A woman with a glittering gown approached, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Sadie, darling, rumors can hurt, especially those that sound believable." Sadie's spine straightened. "They are lies." The woman shrugged lightly. "Sometimes lies spread because people want to believe them." Connor stepped forward, his voice cold as winter. "If you insist on speaking, choose your words with care. You are addressing the woman I am going to marry." The woman paled, murmured an apology, and vanished into the crowd. Sadie looked up at Connor, her breath catching at the fierce devotion in his defense. "You did not have to say that," she whispered. "I meant every word," he replied, his gaze burning into hers. The tension between them grew thicker, woven from fear and longing and the fragile truth of their connection. Sadie found herself leaning toward him without intention, drawn by the warmth he offered. "Come with me," he murmured. He led her toward a quieter hallway, lit by soft sconces, where the noise faded to a distant hum. The moment they reached the dim light, Sadie pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. "I cannot breathe under the weight of all of this," she whispered. "Everywhere I turn, someone is judging me, assuming the worst, treating me like a story they can twist however they wish." Connor stepped closer, his hands settling gently at her waist. His voice was a soft caress. "Sadie, listen to me. You are not alone. You have me." Her eyes glistened. "I am afraid." He pressed his forehead to hers, their breaths intertwining. "I will not let them break you." She lifted her hand, placing it against his cheek. The contact felt like home, warm and instinctive. "Connor," she breathed, "when I am with you, everything else fades, even fear." He closed his eyes, his voice a whisper of confession. "And when I am with you, I feel like a man again, not an image, not a headline, just a man who wants to hold you until the world learns how to be quiet." Her hand slid to the back of his neck, her fingers curling tenderly into his hair. A shiver passed through him at her touch. "Then hold me," she said softly. He did. His arms came around her, enveloping her in a protective embrace that melted every trembling doubt inside her. His warmth, his steady heartbeat, his breath brushing her temple, everything felt grounding. Emotions swelled between them, rich and deep, powerful enough to silence the storm outside. After a long, quiet moment, Sadie pulled back slightly, her eyes lifting to his. "Take me home," she whispered. He nodded, brushing his knuckles down her cheek with unspeakable tenderness. "Always." They left together, their hands intertwined as rain continued to fall. The world outside judged and whispered and clung to lies, but none of it followed them into the sanctuary of the car. Sadie leaned her head against Connor's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as if she were the one truth left in a world full of deception. For the first time that night, she felt safe, and he felt whole. The first snow of the season fell over Nashville like a soft apology. It did not come in a storm, nor with fury. It drifted down gently, gathering on rooftops and bare branches, quieting the city the way a whispered promise quieted a trembling heart. From the large windows of a modest music hall tucked behind an old brick church, the world looked calmer than it had looked in months. Streetlights glowed in warm halos. The sidewalks shone with pale frost. Inside, the air held the scent of pine and cinnamon, and the low hum of anticipation felt like the beginning of a song. Sadie Hart stood in a side room lit by amber lamps, fingers resting on the edge of a wooden vanity that had seen 100 performers steady themselves before going on stage. She wore a simple ivory dress that fell in clean lines to her calves, elegant without being ornate. No glittering tiara, no dramatic train, no attempt to become the fantasy the tabloids once demanded. Her hair was pinned in a soft twist at the nape of her neck, a few loose strands framing her face as if refusing to be controlled. A delicate chain rested against her collarbone, and at its center was a small charm shaped like a tiny key. A key. Not to a mansion, not to a vault, not to a billionaire's world, a key to her own voice. She lifted her eyes to the mirror and met her own reflection with a steadiness she had earned. She had been called too many things by strangers who only knew the rumor of her. She had been reduced to headlines, sliced into assumptions, accused of motives she had never possessed. Yet she was still here, still standing, still breathing in truth. A soft knock came at the door. "Sadie." Meredith Lane's calm voice drifted in, warm and reassuring. "Come in," Sadie answered. Meredith stepped inside, immaculate in a tailored cream suit, her auburn hair smooth and composed as always. In her hands she carried a slim folder, but her expression was gentler than any courtroom could force from her. "It is time," Meredith said quietly. Sadie's throat tightened. "Is he here?" Meredith's eyes softened. "He has been here. He has been pacing like a man who is afraid the world might take something precious from him." Sadie exhaled, a breath that trembled with affection and nerves. He used to pace because he wanted to control the world. "And now," Meredith replied, "he paces because he finally understands he cannot control love." Sadie's lips parted in a faint smile, warmth rising behind her eyes. "He looks different." Meredith nodded, as if she understood exactly what Sadie meant. "He is different. Not because he lost anything, because he chose something." Sadie did not ask what Meredith referred to. She did not need the details. She had watched it unfold like a slow sunrise, not from gossip, but from the quiet truth of Connor's choices. The way he had shown up without excuses, the way he had refused to hide behind polished statements, the way he had finally let consequence touch him without running. Meredith extended the folder. "These are the final documents for the Foundation's oversight. Everything is transparent. External review, independent board, and survivor advocates empowered with real authority." Sadie placed her fingertips on the folder, feeling the gravity beneath the paper. "Thank you," she whispered. Meredith's voice turned even softer. He insisted the oversight be stronger than anyone advised. He wanted it to be impossible to corrupt. Sadie swallowed. "That is the first time I have ever heard a powerful man ask to be held accountable." Meredith looked at her with quiet respect. You taught him how. Sadie's eyes filled with emotion she did not let spill. I did not teach him. He chose. Meredith gave a small nod and stepped aside, opening the door. Then go to him. Sadie walked down the corridor toward the stage entrance, her steps measured and steady. The hall outside was filled with warm light and the low murmur of voices. It was not a lavish ballroom. It was not the kind of place that screamed money. It was intimate, human, alive with the energy of people who had gathered for a reason that mattered. This was not a spectacle. This was a vow. When she reached the threshold, she paused. Connor Kensington stood near the front row, his back half-turned as he spoke quietly to Jax Monroe. Connor wore a dark suit, but without the rigid perfection that had once made him look like a statue. His tie was straight, his hair neatly styled, but there was a softness to him now that no tailor could sew. He turned as if he felt her presence before he saw her, and the moment his eyes met hers, the room around them seemed to disappear. His hazel gaze widened, caught between awe and something deeper, something almost painful in its tenderness. Sadie, he breathed. She walked toward him, and his body shifted as though his instincts wanted to reach for her, shelter her, hold her. He stopped himself, not out of distance, but out of respect, waiting for her to close the gap by her own choice. You look. His voice faltered, and he let out a slow breath, as if steadying his heart. You look like the truth. Sadie's lips trembled into a small smile. That is all I ever wanted to be. His eyes shone, and for a man who had once been called untouchable, he looked now like someone who could be wounded by beauty. Jax quietly stepped away. Meredith moved to the side. Even Elias Crown stood at a distance, watching with an expression that held something unfamiliar in him. Relief. Connor held out his hand, not as a claim, but as an invitation. Sadie placed her hand in his, and the warmth of his skin wrapped around her like home. Are you all right? He asked, voice low. She nodded. I am here. Connor's thumb brushed the back of her hand, slow and reverent. I never thought I would deserve that sentence. Sadie's eyes softened. You do not earn love by being perfect. You earn it by being brave enough to change. His jaw tightened as emotion rose in him. I was not brave for a long time. She stepped closer. But you are now. Connor's gaze dropped briefly, lingering on her lips, then returned to her eyes with deliberate restraint. I have wanted to kiss you since the moment I saw you walk into that first meeting. His voice turned even softer. And every time after. Sadie felt heat bloom in her chest. Then why have you waited? Because I promised myself something, he murmured. That if I ever touched you again, it would never be to hide behind you. It would be to stand beside you. Sadie's breath caught, and she squeezed his hand. Then stand. The room began to settle. Guests took their seats. A quiet hush fell like a blanket. Soft piano music floated through the hall, played by a local musician Connor had hired not for prestige, but because the musician's story was one Sadie had once helped amplify with her own voice. Connor led her toward the small stage. The crowd was not filled with gossip-hungry strangers. It was filled with people whose lives had brushed against the foundation now being launched. Young artists, advocates, mentors, community leaders, and a few survivors who had chosen courageously to be present not as symbols, but as human beings with dignity. Their presence was not a backdrop. It was the heart of the night. Connor stood with Sadie under the warm stage lights, his hand still holding hers, as if he feared letting go would undo everything. He looked out at the room, then back at Sadie, and it was Sadie he spoke to first. Before I say anything, Connor whispered, I need you to know something. Sadie's chest tightened. What? His gaze did not waver. "The person who tried to destroy me, and you, is no longer hidden." A ripple of tension moved through her, but she did not turn away. She had learned that truth, even sharp truth, was better than a sweet lie. Connor's voice remained steady. "Graham Bellinger." Sadie's eyes narrowed slightly, the name settling into her mind like a cold stone. She had heard it in passing, in murmurs, in corporate introductions that made her skin crawl. A board-linked executive with a smile too polite to be trusted. Connor continued, his tone controlled but heavy. "He did not only threaten my career. He built his power on silence. He used people. He bought fear. He hid behind contracts and connections." Connor's throat worked as if he were swallowing something bitter. He is facing charges now, not because he was exposed in a rumor, because evidence was taken from the shadows and handed to the light. Sadie felt a tremor run through her, not of fear, but of a fierce kind of relief. Connor lifted her hand to his chest, pressing her knuckles gently against his heart. "They tried to break you, to break me," he murmured, "but you did not break." Sadie's eyes shimmered. "Neither did you." Connor looked at her as though he could not believe she still stood beside him. "Because you taught me the difference between an image and a man." Sadie's voice was a whisper. "I did not teach you, Connor. I simply refused to disappear." His eyes brightened, and for a moment the mighty man the world once worshipped looked like someone humbly grateful. Connor turned toward the audience. His voice carried through the hall, calm and sincere. "Tonight is not about a nickname," he said. "It is not about the person some tabloids once called the Dubai Maharaja. That name was built on distance, on spectacle, on the illusion of invincibility." He paused, then looked down at Sadie with a tenderness that made the room feel like it was holding its breath. "Tonight is about what remains when you stop hiding." He spoke of the Foundation's mission, not with polished jargon, but with a raw clarity that felt earned. He spoke of transparency, oversight, protection for young artists, and real consequences for those who preyed upon hope. He did not excuse himself. He did not paint himself as a hero. He spoke like a man who understood that redemption was not a declaration, but a lifelong choice. When he finished, the room did not explode into loud applause. It rose into something deeper, a standing ovation that felt like forgiveness being offered carefully, not cheaply, and gratitude being returned with dignity. Connor exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for years. Then he turned back to Sadie, eyes full. "I promised you I would not run," he whispered. Sadie's throat tightened. "And you did not." Connor reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out something small, not a diamond the size of a headline, not a gaudy symbol meant to stun strangers. A ring, elegant and simple, with a single stone that caught the stage light like a quiet star. Sadie's breath stopped. Connor held it up, his hand trembling slightly, a rare imperfection that made him more beautiful than any magazine cover ever could. "I cannot offer you a perfect life," he said, voice low enough that it felt meant only for her, even as the room listened. "But I can offer you my honesty, my effort, my devotion, my respect." He swallowed, and his eyes shone. "I can offer you the man who will get out of the car every time, no matter the cost." Sadie's eyes filled, but she did not let tears fall. She kept her chin high, because love deserved dignity. Connor continued, his voice breaking softly. "Sadie Hart, will you marry me? Not as a story, not as a shield, not as an arrangement, but as my choice and my home." The silence that followed was so profound it felt holy. Sadie stepped closer, her hands lifting to cup his face gently. The warmth of her palms against his cheeks made him close his eyes for a moment, as if surrendering to something he had once feared. "Yes," she whispered. Connor opened his eyes, stunned, as if he needed to hear it again. Sadie smiled through the tremble in her breath. "Yes, Connor, I will." A sound rose from the room, soft and emotional, not the roar of gossip, but the sigh of people witnessing something real. Connor slipped the ring onto her finger with careful tenderness, as though he were placing a vow onto her skin. When he looked up at her, his expression was undone, vulnerable, luminous. He leaned in slowly, giving her time, giving her choice. Sadie met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle, profound, and full of contained longing. Not a performance for cameras, a promise made in breath and warmth and the quiet certainty of two hearts choosing each other in front of a world that had tried to tear them apart. When they parted, Connor rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. Sadie's eyes softened into something radiant. "I love you too, not the legend, not the empire." Her thumb brushed the corner of his jaw, tender and sure. The man. Connor's breath shuddered with emotion. "Then let us live like that." Later, after speeches and embraces and the soft laughter of people who had carried too much pain for too long, Sadie stepped onto the stage with a microphone in her hand. The pianist behind her began a gentle melody, simple and haunting. Connor sat in the front row, watching her like the world had been recreated for him in her silhouette. Sadie's voice filled the hall, warm and steady, carrying a song she had written without compromise. It was not about wealth. It was not about rescue. It was about dignity, about truth, about love that did not demand a woman shrink to be held. Connor's eyes glistened as he listened, his hand covering his mouth for a moment as if to hold in the ache of gratitude. He did not look away. He did not hide the way she moved him. When Sadie finished, the room rose again, applause swelling like a tide. Connor met her at the side of the stage, taking her into his arms with reverence, his hands resting at her waist as if she were the only thing in the world he trusted completely. "You did it," he whispered. Sadie's smile was soft. "We did." They stepped outside into the cold night, where snow continued to fall gently, landing in Sadie's hair and on Connor's shoulders like delicate blessings. The city was quiet, wrapped in winter peace. Connor pulled his coat around her, not as a cage, but as warmth. Sadie leaned into him, her gloved hand tucked into his. For once there were no cameras, no shouts, no voices demanding a story. Only the hush of snow, the glow of streetlights, and the steady rhythm of two hearts that had survived the storm. Connor looked down at her, his voice barely more than a breath. "If the world tries to name us again, let them." Sadie lifted her face to his, eyes shining. "They can call you whatever they want." Connor's lips curved faintly. "And what do you call me?" Sadie rose on her toes, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Mine." Connor's eyes closed for a moment, as if those 4 letters were the most triumphant title he had ever worn. He held her hand a little tighter, and together they walked into the snowy night, not as a myth, not as a headline, but as something far more powerful. A love that was real. Nashville never forgot the winter when truth shook the music empire and love rewrote its future. But 9 years later, the city had softened. Streetlights glowed with a gentler warmth. Murals honoring local artists brightened brick alleyways. And at the heart of this renewed city stood a foundation so deeply trusted that people spoke its name with reverence, the Kensington Heart Foundation. Inside its newest community theatre, sunlight streamed through tall windows, landing softly across rows of red velvet seats. Children practiced harmonies on stage, while mentors adjusted microphones and guided small hands across piano keys. The hall echoed with laughter, rhythm, and dreams, exactly what it had been built for. Behind the stage curtain, Sadie Kensington adjusted a microphone for a shy 10-year-old girl preparing for her first recital. Her hair, now longer and streaked softly with honey-gold highlights, was pinned behind one ear. Fine lines of wisdom cradled her eyes, but in those same eyes lived the same warmth that had once unraveled a billionaire's isolation. "You are ready, sweetheart," Sadie said gently. "Sing like the world is yours." The girl nodded, steadying her breath. Sadie stepped back, her gaze drifting toward the auditorium doors just as they opened. Connor entered the hall with a presence that time had not diminished. His once sharply polished edges had softened into something stronger, confidence without arrogance, influence without distance. Touches of silver threaded through his dark hair, and fine lines traced the corners of his eyes, shaped more by laughter than by stress. And the moment his eyes found Sadie, his entire expression changed. 9 years later, he still looked at her as if she were a miracle he had been handed unexpectedly and spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of. He crossed the hall toward her with the ease of a man approaching the love he never feared losing, but never took for granted. "You are glowing," he murmured, kissing her forehead as his hand found her waist with familiar tenderness. Sadie leaned into him, smiling. That is what happens when a child finally hits the note she has been terrified of for weeks. "She learned from the best," he said. Sadie laughed softly, nudging him as if to scold him for flattery, though her eyes melted with affection. A small pair of footsteps echoed behind Connor. "Mom? Dad?" They both turned. A boy of 8 ran toward them, curls bouncing, cheeks flushed. He wore a navy sweater with a guitar embroidered on it, and his youthful energy radiated like sunshine through the hall. Emerson Kensington, their son, a child born not of convenience or strategy, but of deep devotion, a living symbol of second chances and love chosen again every single day. Emerson grabbed his mother's hand. "Mom, are you coming to see my rehearsal now?" Sadie crouched to his level, brushing a stray curl off his forehead. "I would not miss it for anything." Connor ruffled their son's hair. "I will be sitting in the front row, cheering too loudly." Emerson giggled. "That is embarrassing, Dad." "Exactly," Connor said with a playful grin. From the hallway, a clear voice called out, "Emerson, come join your group." A tall woman with chestnut hair tied in a neat ponytail approached, waving warmly. It was Chloe Bennett, once a survivor who testified against Graham Bellinger 9 years earlier. Her bravery had ignited the movement that reshaped the industry. Now she was the program director for the foundation, mentoring children with a dignity forged in fire. Chloe smiled at Sadie. "He is doing wonderfully today." Sadie's chest filled with a quiet pride, not only for her son, but for the woman standing before her. Chloe had rebuilt her life with a strength she never showed off, but carried gracefully every step she took. Connor placed a gentle hand on Sadie's lower back, his voice soft. "How does it feel?" Sadie looked around the hall, emotion blooming behind her eyes. "It feels right." Connor nodded. "It still surprises me sometimes. How far everything has come." Sadie squeezed his hand. "We earned this peace." They stood there for a moment, silent, watching Emerson run onto the stage. He carried a small microphone, stepping into place between the other children. Connor exhaled softly. 9 years ago, I thought I would lose the company, the respect of an entire city, everything I had built. And instead, Sadie whispered, her fingers brushing his, you gained everything that matters. He turned toward her, lifting her hand to his lips. I gained you, and through you, the truth. She smiled, eyes shimmering. Truth cost something. It always does. Connor nodded. And Graham Bellinger paid the highest price. Their expressions darkened with the memory, Graham, the man who had tried to destroy both their lives, had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term, not because of rumor, but because of overwhelming evidence uncovered by the very oversight committee Connor had insisted upon. Graham had lost his power, his network, and his freedom. The cost had been steep, but justice demanded it. "Do you ever think about him?" Connor asked quietly. Sadie's eyes drifted toward the stage lights. "Sometimes, but not with fear, only gratitude." "Gratitude," Connor murmured, surprised. She nodded softly. "Because without the storm he created, we might never have discovered how strong we could be." Connor drew her close, his breath brushing her temple. "You have always been stronger than you know. And you," she whispered, "have become the man you were meant to be." The lights dimmed in the hall, signaling the beginning of the children's practice performance. Parents and supporters found seats. Soft music filled the air. Sadie and Connor slipped into the second row, leaving the front row open for the children's mentors. They sat close enough that their shoulders brushed, close enough that their hands found each other without thought. Connor laced his fingers with hers. "I could live 1,000 years, he said softly, "and I would still never understand how I got to be this lucky." Sadie rested her head on his shoulder. "You got lucky the moment you chose honesty." A brief silence passed before Connor whispered, "And you got unlucky the moment you got into my car." Sadie laughed under her breath, lifting her head to meet his eyes. "Connor Kensington, if I had to go through every moment again, including the painful ones, to reach this life with you, I would do it without hesitation." Emotion caught in his throat, tightening his voice. "You are my home, Sadie. You always were." The children began their melody, their soft voices rising in imperfect harmony. Emerson stood front and center, his little chest rising as he prepared for his solo. When he sang the first note, clear and unafraid, Sadie felt tears gather in her eyes. Connor slipped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as their son's voice filled the hall. A life built from brokenness, anchored by truth, held together by love. When the song ended, applause filled the room. Emerson beamed proudly, waving at his parents. Sadie waved back, her smile bright and full. Connor pressed a kiss to her temple, lingering there. 9 years, he whispered, "and I love you more today than I did the day you said yes." Sadie turned her face toward him, their foreheads touching gently. 9 years, she whispered back, "and I would still choose you, every day, every moment." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Nashville in a soft white blanket, and inside the hall, beneath warm lights and the echo of children's voices, a family sat, hand in hand. Their love had not only endured, it had built something powerful, something lasting, something beautifully, fiercely real. Every love story leaves behind a quiet trail of lessons, and the journey of Sadie Hart and Connor Kensington is no exception. Their story reminds us that the truth has a cost, but it also has a purpose. It teaches us that love is not a shield against life's storms, but the courage to walk through them with someone who refuses to let go of your hand. And perhaps most importantly, it shows that the past does not define us unless we allow it to. We can choose honesty over fear, dignity over silence, and transformation over comfort. Sadie stepped into a world that tried to swallow her, yet she held on to her voice. Connor stepped away from a pedestal built on illusion, and in doing so, finally became the man he was meant to be. Together, they rebuilt a life with purpose, transparency, and compassion. Their love was not perfect, but it was resilient, and resilience is the quiet engine of every lasting happiness. Now I invite you, dear listener, to reflect on this journey. What moved you most? What moments stayed with you long after the chapter ended? Your thoughts deepen the life of this story, and I would love to read them. And if you watched until the very end, write the word truth in the comments, so I know you stayed with Sadie and Connor all the way through their transformation. If this story touched you and you wish to support the dedicated team behind these narrations, you may send a super thanks in any amount you choose. Your generosity helps us continue creating the emotional, cinematic experiences you love. And if supporting in that way is not possible, sharing this story with someone you know is another deeply appreciated way to help this channel grow. Do not forget to watch the other narrated romances I'm leaving for you in the cards. Your presence here means more than you know, and I thank you for taking this journey with us.